Shalom. Welcome to Web Yeshiva. My name is Yitzhak Zuriel. You are viewing the class, a one-time session on the subject of Yachatz, the stage of the Seder of the night of Pesach, in which we break the middle matzah. And this is part of an extensive series that many of the staff and the faculty of WebYeshiva are giving sessions on the different parts of the Seder, plus a few on more general topics about the night of the Seder. And without further ado, let me begin my presentation and we'll start. Okay, we're going to talk about this Yachatz, and let me just bring up the presentation, then we'll begin to talk about it. Okay. A good part of our session this evening is, or today, depending where you are, is about the halachic basis for Yachatz, the halachic grounding in which this practice comes from, where it comes, why we do it, and the minhag. What I mean here by the minhag is a little bit about minhagim that are connected with it, as well as the minhag, meaning the minhag of how we paskin to do it. So that's going to be the main focus of this session, and toward the end of the session, we'll talk a little bit about some additional layers of meaning that were added to this stage of the Seder, the Yachatz, but are not really connected so much to the halacha, the technical halachic details and everything. Anyway, I think also, even though we're going to be talking about halacha, there's a lot of ideas that flow through this, so you'll see what we do. Okay, in any case, Yachatz is that part of the Seder that probably has, I would say, if you open up a standard Haggadah of Pesach, almost all Haggadot, I looked at a lot of them recently, and it's probably the item of the Seder that has the least written about it in the Haggadah. It usually has one line that says, you break the middle matzah, you put in the one half into in between the two other matzot, if that's the custom, by the way, and we'll get to that issue. And then you put aside the larger half, which is a funny idea, larger half, but obviously when you break something, you're trying to break it in half, but it doesn't come out exactly equal. So the larger half, according to the custom, we'll see a little bit about that also, is put aside for the afikoman, right? Is wrapped up, put aside, whatever. We'll talk about that subsequently. In any case, that's all it says, and then it's very laconic, and then it goes on to the next thing in the Seder. We don't really have very much explanation about Yachatz. Maybe some Aggadot that bring stories or bring Hasidic Vortlach or whatever have something about Yachatz. But in general, it's not a very not very verbose description or instruction of what to do, like there is with several of the other things. Okay, so when we're going to begin studying about this, but we're going to be studying excerpts from a sugya in Masechet Brachot. I'm going to be teaching from the Talmudic sources about this, and also going to the Rishonim in this session. The sugya in Masechet Brachot, I want to just preface it by saying that the initial, this slide and probably the next slide as well, it's not directly about the night of the Seder, but it's important background to understand what we're doing on the night of the Seder, okay? And then you'll see that this same sugya in Masechet Brachot actually becomes very relevant to the night of the Seder, in explicitly so at the end of what I'm going to quote. So let's begin with the more background material. Okay, The Gemara begins, I'm going to just take my tools here, one moment, so I can point. Okay. The Gemara begins with a statement by Rava. Amar Rava, the Amora Rava, 4th generation Babylonian Amora. Right? We're on Daf Lamed Tet Amud Beit in Masechet Brachot. Mevarech, says Rava. Mevarech v'achar kach botzea. He makes the blessing, and after that, he botzea. Botzea in this context means to break the bread. In other words, to break the bread in order to eat it, in order to begin eating it. Okay? So Rava says you make the bracha, and only after that, you break the bread in order to eat it. That's Rava. Okay, there's another opinion. We'll get to that in just a minute. Neharda'e avdi kerabi Chia, v'Rabanan avdi kerava. Okay? The people of Nahardea, the people of the city of Nahardea in Bavel, whether we're talking about it sounds like it's the general populace. It could also mean perhaps some of the leaders there, whatever, but it was the population, the people in Nahardea, they did like Rabbi Chia. By the way, we haven't heard yet what Rabbi Chia says, right? We'll get to that. He actually is quoted earlier in the sugya, but I decided for efficiency's sake to wait because he's quoted again right away in the next line, and just easier to see it. So just bear with us for a second. Now the Nahardai do like Rabbi Chia, not like Rava. The Rabbanan and the Chachamim, they do like Rava. Okay, so what Rava said, that first you make a blessing, and by the way, this is not about Pesach. This is about any time of the year, any meal of the year, any time you're going to eat bread, right? We're talking about bread here. When you eat bread, Rava says you have to first make a blessing, and only after that you break the bread and begin to eat, right? Amar Ravina. Ravina says, Ravina was one of the latest Amoraim. He was the last generation of Amoraim, among those who put the Gemara together, Ravina and Ravashi. Amra li em. My mother said to me, he calls her em, mother said to me, Avuch aved k'Rabbi Chia, your father did things like Rabbi Chia. We still haven't heard what Rabbi Chia says. Here we go. Damar Rabbi Chia, that Rabbi Chia said, what did Rabbi Chia say about this? Tzarich shetichle bracha im hapat, that you need to finish the bracha together with the bread. What does that mean? So I brought Rashi to explain that a little bit. I mean, he obviously disagrees with Rava because it's all set up like a machloket here, a disagreement between them. So he must feel that you do not finish the bracha before you break the bread. Rather, you have to finish the bracha together with the bread. In other words, as you break the bread to eat it, you're still saying the bracha right before it goes in your mouth, apparently, something like that. Okay, let's see Rashi on this. Amar Rabbi Chia, tzarich shetichle. Right, I put in parentheses Rabbi Chia just to show right. You have to finish the bracha with the pot. Right, said Rabbi Chia. Rashi explains that. Right, birkat hamotzi. You have to finish birkat hamotzi lechem min haaretz, in prisata prusa min hapat, together with the slicing or the breaking off of the prusa. Prusa means a slice or a piece, right, of the bread. In other words, when he says bracha im hapat, shetichle bracha im hapat, Rashi says that means that you, just like we said actually, that you have to finish the bracha at the time that you're breaking the bread, you're slicing off the piece. Okay, it's a machloket. Rashi also explains Rava's position. But he didn't look at that. Amar Rava mevarech v'achar kach botzea v'gomer kol habracha, says Rashi. You have to finish the entire bracha, the achar kach, and after that, mafris haprusa. You break off or mafrish. You separate the prusa. You break off or slice off the slice or the piece. Dekalya bracha apat shalem. Why is that? Rashi explains what's underlying Rava's position here, that you have to finish the bracha, you have to finish the bracha, kalya bracha, the bracha has to finish on the aleph here is like al in Hebrew. It's a Aramaicism that Rashi is using here. It has to finish on a pat shalem, on a full, complete pot, a complete piece of, complete entity of bread. In other words, a whole loaf, a whole roll, a whole pita, whatever it is. Okay, you have to finish the bracha on the entirety of it as it's still whole, and then you break it, and then you eat it. As opposed to Rabbi Chia, who says you have to finish the Birkat HaMotzi as you're breaking the bread. In other words, apparently, perhaps underneath this machloket is the idea that, according to Rava, the bracha should be said on a whole thing. It seems to have to do something with the importance of the whole, of the entirety of the thing. We don't want to say it on a piece of it, right? Whereas Rabbi Chia says, no, you have to finish. Rabbi Chia, by the way, was a much earlier Amora. He was, in fact, in the transitional generation between Amoraim and Tanaim and Amoraim, Rabbi Chia. So this machloket spans some generations, but Rabbi Chia's position was that, so they never saw each other, Rabbi Chia and Rava. It's a machloket, it's brought in the Gemara as a machloket, but they didn't actually sit in the same Beit Midrash. But Rabbi Chia holds that you have to finish the bracha as you slice the bread. In other words, he feels that the birkatam, that you have to lessen the gap between when you make the bracha and when you actually eat the bread. You have to bring it so that you make the bracha right before you eat it. It makes sense. That's what you're saying the bracha about eating it. You're not saying the bracha about something else. Okay? That's the machloket Rav and Rabbi Chia. Just we'll finish the piece of Gemara that I quoted on this slide. V'Rabanan avdei kerava. We said that this is the finish of the quote of Ravina, who said that his mother said to him, his mother testified to Ravina. Apparently Ravina's father was nifter. He died when Ravina was young, and Ravina didn't know how his father acted with respect to the bread. But his mother tells him that your father did it like Rabbi Chia. In other words, he sliced or broke the bread as he was finishing the bracha, right? And the Rabbanan, but the Chachamim, all the other Chachamim, they did like Rava. They did the way Rava says, that you finish the bracha completely on the complete loaf, and then you break it. The Gemara concludes here. That's the end of the story, or this account that Rava brings about his mother's edut, his mother's testimony, so to speak, about her husband's behavior and what the Chachamim used to do. The Hilchata Kerava. The halacha is like Rava. Damar mevarech v'achar kach botzeh. That's the halacha. And that halacha applies, I want to just clarify what the situation is. The situation is that you're given one whole loaf, or one whole roll, or one whole pita, whatever it is. One whole matzah, for that matter. Let's relate it somehow to Pesach also, okay? But it doesn't have to be, right? If you want to make a motzi on it, you should make it on the whole thing, and that's the way we paskin. The Gemara paskins it like that, like Rava. Okay, you have to finish the bracha on the whole thing, then you break it and start eating it. Okay, that's the what we learned from the first part of the sugya. Now the sugya moves to a different case. It's the same sugya, also on Daf Lamed Ter Amud Beit of Masechet Brachot, and we quote here an Amoraic piece of halacha. Itmar, it was said, which means this is halacha of the Amoraim. Okay, in other words, it's a piece of Amoraic material that's earlier than when they put the Gemara together, so they quote it as a literary source. Okay, Heviu lifneihem petitim ushleimin. They brought before them pieces. Petitim means pieces of bread. Like the root of it is pat, right? So petit is like a little pat, like which means not doesn't mean a small whole loaf or a small whole pita or a small whole roll, like what they call a 2-bite roll or something. A petite means a broken piece. That's what it means here, at least. Okay, so they brought before them for a meal petitim, broken pieces of bread, slices, broken, whatever, half things, whatever, broken up, and shleimim. It's a different case than we saw at the beginning of the Gemara, right? Here we're talking about you have in front of you both petitim, both broken pieces, and whole pieces together. What do? Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna says, Mivarech ala petitin ufoter et hashleimim. Rav Huna says, you make the bracha on the petitin, on the little broken pieces, or on the broken pieces. And by doing that, you exempt the shleimim, meaning that bracha covers the whole ones as well. Now, this is quite jarring for us to read this. This is not how we conduct ourselves today. If I were to tell you that I'm bringing you some slices of bread that are left over from Shabbat on Sunday for lunch, and some rolls, you're going to make the hamotzi on the rolls because they're whole. That's what we've been taught to do. Well, that's not what Rav Huna says. Rav Huna seems to be saying that now the question is he requiring you to make the bracha on the petitim and thereby exempt having to say the bracha on the whole ones? Or is he just saying you can do this? It's an option. You're not required to make the bracha on the shleimim. That's possible. That's what he's saying. Rashi says actually something very interesting here. Look at Rashi. Petitin u'shleimim amar Rav Huna. And Rashi now paraphrases Rav Huna. Im ratza, if he wants, it's optional. Mevarech ala petitin. He can make the bracha on the petitim. In other words, if you want to butter a slice and you're ready to eat and you don't want to bother cutting and dealing with cutting a whole piece, you can make the bracha on the petitim if you want to. And by doing that, you can exempt, like Rav Huna said, you can exempt the whole pieces. Okay? But Rashi brings a second case, which he thinks is also embedded in the words of Rav Huna. But if the broken pieces of bread, the slices, the chunks, whatever, are larger, they're bigger than the shleimim. In other words, you have small little pitot or small rolls or whatever, small loaves, but you have big chunks of bread, like you have half a loaf or 2/3 of a loaf or something like that with it. And that's considered a petit because it's not a full loaf. Tzarich levarech aleim, Rashi says. In other words, Rashi says that Rashi feels that in the words of Rav Huna are two different halachot. One is the option, if you want to, you can be mevarech ala petitim. I'm pointing up at the top again. You can optionally make the bracha if you want on the petitim. If they are as normally, they're smaller than the shleimim, then you can do that if you want, and you can be poter the shleimim. But if you're in a situation where the petitim are larger than the shleimim, then for Rav Huna, it's clear that you make the bracha on the petitim because they're larger and they're, in that sense, they have more weight, they have more significance, they're more important, something like that. Okay? This is a different case than we talked about in the first part of the sugya. There you were given a whole thing, and what do you do? How do you make the bracha? Here we're saying you're given both, right? What do you do? So Rav Huna says you can optionally make a bracha on the petitim, even if they're small little pieces. But if they're bigger, then you make it on them, and then you poter the shleimim. Now we have the dissenting opinion. The Rabbi Yochanan, by the way, Rav Huna is an Amora Bavel. Rabbi Yochanan was an Amora in Eretz Israel, in Tiberia. Okay? Rabbi Yochanan, Amora, first generation, by the way. Rav Huna was like a second generation. Okay? Something like that, third generation. Okay. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Shleima mitzvah min hamuvchar. the entire one, the whole pieces, in other words, the whole roll, the whole loaf, the whole pita, whichever ones are whole, doing it, making the bracha on them is a mitzvah min hamuvchar. What does that mean, that expression, mitzvah min hamuvchar? We see this in many places. It means that that's the choice way to do the mitzvah. That's the correct way to do that. That's the best way to do the mitzvah. There is a machloket here. Rav Huna is saying it doesn't matter. You can do it on the petitim if you want, under any circumstances. And in some cases, you have to do it on the petitim. And Rabbi Yochanan disagrees with both of those statements and says no. Both of those statements says no. You should always make it on the shleimim. It's a mitzvah min hamuvchar. If you made it on the petitim, you didn't do an aveira. But it's not the best way to do it. That's the machloket. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, a later Amora. This is a little bit further down in the sugya, but it's relating to these two opinions. V'yirei shamayim yotzei yidei shnehem. Someone who is a yarei shamayim, who fears heaven, he shall do things in such a way that he is yotzei by both of them. In other words, that he fulfills the words of both of them. He does it correctly according to both positions, right? And just to be clear, because remember, this is later in the sugya, I put an ellipsis here. It's a little bit farther down in the sugya. It's not clear when you read it who are these two, who are the two. So Rashi makes it very clear. Yotzei yedei shnehem, yedei machloket shel Rav Huna v'Rabbi Yochanan. In other words, if he's somebody who's Yarei Shamayim, says Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, he does things in such a way that he can cover both of those positions. And the Gemara asks, Umanu, or Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak himself asks, who is such a person like that? Mar berei de Ravina. Mar berei de Ravina. Mar, the son of Ravina. Okay. He was a very late Amora because his father was in one of the a cohort of Rav Ashi, right? So anyway, Mar Berei de Ravina, Mar, that's his name, or he was at least given that title. I guess he was the big gadol at that time. He, the son of Ravina, right? Umaniach prusa betoch hashlema. Ubotzea. Look at what he says he does. He, in order to fulfill both sides of this machloket, he would place the prusa, the patit, he would place this slice or the broken piece inside the whole one and then break bread. Which means here, he'd make the bracha, and then botzeh here includes making the bracha, of course, right? Because both of them talked about making the bracha, and the machloka was about when you make what you make the bracha on. So botzeh here means that you make the bracha and break the bread. So Mar Berei de Ravina came up with a compromise, and Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says it's a good thing to do, to follow him, to place the prusa within the shlema and then break the bread. Rashi explains this a little bit. Let's look at Rashi. What does it mean to place the prusa inside? First of all, Rashi's Dibur Matil says, Maniat prusa tachat shlema, under the shlema. That's different than inside. Well, we can imagine that maybe you can't really bend the top, you can't really bend the whole one around the prusa. So Rashi says you put the whole one on top of the prusa. You put the whole one on top of the broken one, right? And then you don't see it. And Rashi says, "V'nimtzeu shteihen biyado." So you're found having both of them in your hand. Both the whole one and the half and the broken one are in your hand. Ubotzea omishteihen omin hashlema. And then you're botzea either with both of them together or with the whole one. In other words, it doesn't matter anymore, because since you have the prusa in there with it, now you make the bracha and you're always breaking the shlema. You're always going to In other words, so that way you're fulfilling Rabbi Yochanan's requirement that it's a mitzvah min mufchar to be botzea on the shlema, but you're also fulfilling Rav Huna's requirement. If you want to say it's a requirement, or you're also doing it the way Rav Huna says, if you want to, that you can have the prusa in there, and then you're, as it were, saying it on both. So you've got that also. Okay, and that's what we see here. Okay, now we get to the part of the sugya that relates directly to Pesach. Questions up to here? Took us almost the first half of the shiur to get to this point, but now things will flow very quickly, and you'll understand. Everything will fall into place, I hope. Okay, the continuation of the same sugya in Masechet Brachot, Daf Lamed Tet Amud Beit, same page, a little bit further down. Amar Rav Papa, fourth generation Amora, in Bavel. Hakol modim bePesach. Everyone agrees regarding Pesach. Shemaniach prusa betoch shlema uvotzea. That he places the prusa, the slice, the piece, here we'll say piece because that's a better description of the broken matzah, that he places the piece inside the shlema, inside the whole one, and breaks bread, meaning he makes the bracha and breaks the bread. Okay, now, that's a little hard for us to understand again, the language betoch, inside it. Most of us who eat the kind of matzah, at least like the Ashkenazi, that's brittle, right? Brittle matzah, you can't really do that. You can't put one inside the other. But there are Sephardim who eat matzah that's kosher. It's kosher matzah. And I mean, it's done very carefully. It's done within 18 minutes, but it comes out being sort of soft. And they could do that, okay? But Rashi, we have Rashi from the previous slide, who said that bitoch really means under. Like, in other words, the thing you see is the shlema. So that's how we will understand Rav Huna, that you place the broken one underneath the whole one, and then you botzea, meaning you make the bracha and you break the matzah, the whole matzah, and you start eating. Okay, that's Rav Papa. And we do something like that, right? If you remember your Seder from years past, we have, when we get to, it's actually a later stage, I'm not really talking about that here, but the Yachatz is the preparation for it, right? We'll get to that shortly. But we take a broken piece, we put it underneath a whole piece. We actually put it between two whole pieces, right? And that's what we say hamotzi on. So that group of the three matzot together. We'll see why shortly, but that's Rav Papa. That's our way of fulfilling what Rav Papa says. Rav Papa asks, or the Gemara asks, my Tama, it could be Rav Papa or it could be the later Amoraim, not clear. What is the reason for this? Why do we do this? Why is it that on Pesach everybody agrees that you have to do it that way? In other words, before, on the previous part of the sugya, the previous slide, we said that advice of putting the prusa inside or underneath the shlema is to fulfill both of those positions in the machloket about what you do when you have a whole one and a broken one, right? You don't know what to do. You want to fulfill both. You want to try to do it according to both sides of the machloket. But here, Rav Papa is saying everybody agrees that on Pesach you have to do this. So what's the reason? Why? Why do we have to deal with this prusa, with this broken piece on Pesach? Answer: Lechem oni ketiv. It's written in the pasuk, Lechem oni, which is usually translated in the Haggadot that I've seen in English, right? The bread of affliction, right? The bread of affliction. Oni means affliction. Oni means also poverty, right? Affliction, poverty, right? That's what's written in the pasuk, Lechem oni. So because of lechem oni, somehow, it requires us to use a broken piece, right? Look at Rashi. Rashi explains it explicitly. It's something the Gemara doesn't do. The Gemara just says, it says lechem oni. You're supposed to understand from that what it means. The reason is because elsewhere it's dealt with in the Gemara, but not here, not in Masechet Brachot. But look at Rashi, and we're going to see that sugya in Masechet Pesachim in just a moment. Lechem oni ktiv, Rashi, v'darko shel ani. It's the way of a poor person, of an afflicted person, or a poor person, a wretched person, whatever you want to call it, bifrusa, to have a broken piece, right? Why is that? Maybe they can't afford enough bread, so they're eating the leftover bread from yesterday. They're eating whatever. They're saving it for the next meal, so they deal more. They don't always have a whole loaf, a whole pita, a whole whatever, right? So that it's the way of an ani, says Rashi, with a prusa. We'll see where Rashi got that from momentarily. But that's what Rashi says, and that's why we need the prusa. In other words, what Papa is saying is, we have to put the prusa together with the shlema underneath or inside, so we see the shlema, but we have to have the prusa there because we need to have a prusa because of the pasuk lechem oni, because matzah that we're going to eat for the mitzvah has to be lechem oni. Lefichach, therefore, says Rashi, tzarich sheyireh kevotzea min haprusa. Look what Rashi says, interesting. He says we need to be, it needs, tzarich sheyireh, not yireh. It's necessary to be seen. When somebody looks at what you're doing, to be seen as if you are botzea min haprusa, as if you are actually breaking bread from the prusa. But actually, if you put it inside or underneath, like Rashi said before, then you don't really, what you see is the shlema on top, but still, we all know that the prusa is in there, so that even though you are really doing it like Rabbi Yochanan said, that you're doing it on the whole one, because you always have to do it, say amotzi on the whole one, but it looks like you're also doing it on the prusa, because the prusa is there with it. And we need that, says Rashi, because of lechem oni. Right? There's a little piece here that goes right after Rav Papa, and we have to see it. We must see it because it's relevant to us. Amar Rabbi Abba. It seems off subject, but in a minute we'll bring it in. Amar Rabbi Abba. Uvishabat chayav adam livtsoa al shtei kikarot. Rabbi Abba says that on Shabbat, a person is obligated livtsoa, which we understand means to break bread, meaning to make a motzi and to break the bread to eat it, on 2 loaves, or 2 whole loaves. Why? My Tama, what's the reason? Lechem mishne ketiv. Because a double portion of bread is written. Where is that written? Does anybody know? Anybody remember? I'll tell you. It's written in... Go ahead. Please.
It's a double portion of mana for Shabbos.
Man, very good. In the portion, in the account about the man, okay, about the man, it says that they got lechem mishnah on Erev Shabbat, and they didn't get any on Shabbat. So that's, because of that, we are required to make hamotzi at the meals of Shabbat, on the su'udot of Shabbat, on 2 loaves, okay? Now, it doesn't say this here, but I'm going to tell you, and the poskim will say this, that there's no difference between Yom Tov and Shabbat. We're going to actually see it ourselves in the Rosh in just a moment, but there's no difference between Yom Tov and Shabbat. Yom Tov also needs lechem mishneh for the same reason. So we need to have 2 whole loaves on Yontif. Okay, that's important to keep in mind. Okay, we're going to go on to the next slide. That's the sugya in brachot. Okay, So we learned something. We learned something about what we do on Leila Seder is that we have to have a broken piece. It's important to have a broken piece because of lechem oni. And let's go on, right? And we have to have it together with the whole ones because of all these considerations that we learned about the machloket, Rabbi Yochanan and Rav Huna. Okay, now, by the way, the pasuk here I bring at the bottom of the slide. Let's look at that first. The pasuk that mentions lechem oni. It's in pasuk Devarim. Sefer Devarim, Perek Tet Zayin, pasuk Gimel. Right? It's talking about the mitzvah of Pesach, the mitzvot of Pesach there. It's a segment, it's a section that talks about the holidays. And it says, Lo tochal alav chametz. You may not eat on it chametz. Alav could mean regarding the holiday. Maybe it also means regarding the Korban Pesach. You can't eat with it chametz. Shivat yamim tochal alav matzot. Lechem oni. It's clear now from the alav that it's talking about 7 days. So it's not about the Korban Pesach. It's about the holiday. So you may not eat on the holiday chametz. Shivat yamim, you may eat. 7 days, you may eat on it matzot, or you shall eat on it. So a little bit of a discussion among the poskim, in the Gemara also, whether we're obligated to actually eat matzah every day of Pesach, but that's certainly no, we have an obligation the first night, right, or the first day, right? Okay, now, anyway, let's finish that pasuk. Shivat yamim tochal alav matzot lechem oni. 7 days you will eat on it matzot lechem oni, the bread of affliction. So the requirement to eat matzah is integrally connected to the idea of lechem oni. We're required to eat lechem oni. Ki b'chipazon, why? Ki b'chipazon yatzata me'eretz mitzrayim, leman tizkor et yom tzeitecha me'eretz mitzrayim kol yemei chayecha. Because with haste, in haste, quickly, you went out from Mitzrayim, and we all know the story that the bread didn't have time to rise, and therefore we had matzah instead of chametz. And so eating the matzah is a remembrance of that, and that's called lechem oni because it doesn't rise. Risen bread is nice bread. It's bread that you want to eat. The flat bread that didn't rise isn't as appealing. It's lechem oni. It's lechem oni in its very nature, what it is. Okay, so we want to remember because we went out quickly from Eretz Mitzrayim, and that's a reflection of the fact that the Egyptians were terrified after the 10 plagues, particularly the plague of Makat Bechorot, and so they hurried Bnei Israel out of Mitzrayim. So the haste with which we left Mitzrayim, which is captured in the matzah that we carried out of Mitzrayim, is a snapshot of the terror that struck the hearts of the Egyptians as a result of the ultimate plague and all the others by that token. And so that's the memory we have in order that we should remember the day we got out of Mitzrayim. In other words, part of the memory of getting out of Mitzrayim isn't just the getting out, but why we got out, how we got out, the mechanism of the Makat Bechorot. Okay. Anyway, going back to the Gemara in Pesachim, right? Tav Kuf Tet Zayin Amud Beit. We have a Braita. The Braita talks about this issue of lechem oni, about the meaning of lechem oni. And by the way, you'll see that in the Gemara, they don't take the meaning that I suggested, which is it's called lechem oni because it's poor bread, it's flat, it doesn't rise, it's not nice. That's not what they say. Tanya Nami Hachi. We also have a Braita. There was a discussion before this. We'll just look at the Braita. Right? Tanaitic source, right? Tanya Nami Hachi, quoted in the Gemara. Lechem Oni. What is this Lechem Oni? Lechem she'onim alav dvarim harbe. It's lechem that they answer over it or say over it. Onim in biblical Hebrew can mean both to answer and to say or to recite or to say, right? Lechem she'onim alav, that they say over it many things. Okay? Davar acher, another thing. So that's another explanation. So let's understand the first explanation. The first explanation is that what is lechem oni? It's a play on words. It's not the pshat in the pasuk. The pshat of the pasuk clearly only has something to do with affliction, with wretchedness, with poverty, right? But the drash, which is the first reason given, the first explanation given for what lechem oni is in this braita, is that it has to do with onim alav devarim, that we say things over. In other words, while we have the matzah in front of us at Leila Seder, we say the Haggadah, we say all kinds of things, right? We talk about Yetziat Mitzrayim. So the lechem oni has to do with the remembrance and the telling, the core meaning and purpose of Leila Seder, the core purpose of doing all these mitzvot that we do in Leila Seder, right, and on Pesach, is to remember Yetziat Mitzrayim. So the core, so that's the core mitzvah really is the Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim in a way, right? That's what this is. So that's what this first explanation sees it as pointing to. Davar acher, another explanation. Lechem oni. What is lechem oni? Oni ketiv. Notice, it's pronounced oni with a cholem, like a vav in it, right? Oni. But it's written with chaser. It's written in the Torah, lechem oni, despite the fact that it's not written that way here. It's actually in the pasuk, look over here, right? Down here, it's written without a vav. It's written, you pronounce it oni, which means poverty or affliction, right? The state of being in poverty is what's written, and is what it means. That's the way we read it. But the written word can be read as ani, meaning a poor person, right? Instead of vocalizing it oni, say ani, a poor person, ani, right? And that, so now the drush is based on that, the morphology of the word as it appears in the pasuk. Ma ani, just as a poor person, shedarko befrusa, that his way is with a slice, with a piece of bread, with a broken piece of bread, right? Like we said in Rashi, this is the source for Rashi. Rashi chose this explanation in the previous slide that we saw. Afkan befrusa, even here with a prusa. In other words, on the night of Seder, right? We have to do it with a prusa. In other words, what we're saying is the mitzvah of eating, because that's what the pasuk is talking about. Tochal alav matzot, when you eat the matzah for the mitzvah, and it's not necessarily, I know it says shivat yamim, but we understand from other psukim that it's not, the mitzvah of matzah is only the first night, to eat the mitzvah of eating matzah, the requirement to eat matzah. So that's with a prusa. Right? We have to eat a broken piece because of the word oni, ani, just like an ani, his ways with prusa. So we also have to be aniim in that respect on the night of Leil Seder. Davar acher, a third explanation, ma darko shel ani, just as the way of an ani, the way of a poor person, hu masik v'ishto ofa, he stokes the oven and his wife bakes because they're poor. And they have to scramble for a living. They don't have time, so they do everything very quickly. So they work together. He continues to stoke the oven to keep it hot, and she bakes. That's how they bake their bread. Not talking about Pesach, but we're talking about in general. And so here also, afkan nami, hu masik v'ishto ofa. When we're preparing matzah, in other words, this explanation is looking at the way matzah is made. Okay, he stokes it, he stokes the oven, and his wife bakes. In other words, it's, as you know, probably, if you've ever seen a matzah baking or participated in a matzah baking, many people work together to make it happen efficiently and quickly so that we can finish in 18 minutes, right? And that's the way matzah is prepared, right? So that, in other words, that's also the way of an ani. It's a second meaning based on the morphology of the word as it appears in the pasuk oni, which is without the vav, and therefore it can be read ani. And from that we have two possible meanings. One is that it's the way of the ani to eat a broken piece, that's sort of the way we eat it, the way we do the mitzvah. But the other meaning given to it, the third meaning in this Braita, is that it's the ani, it's the way of the ani to work two people together to finish it quickly, or maybe because they can't hire help or whatever. So the husband stokes the oven and the wife bakes, and that is a model for how we bake matzah. We work many people together as a team. Okay, let's move on. All right, don't be scared. Don't be intimidated. I'll read this quickly. This is the most important slide. This is in terms of this part of the presentation. Right. Okay, very good. They can't afford enough fuel. That's another part of it. Right. I didn't say that. Very good. Thank you. Right. Okay. All right. This is the Rosh. The Rosh. The Rosh is one of the Rishonim who wrote a work of halacha based on the Gemara. He quotes the Gemara, he discusses it, and then he comes up with the halacha. He similar to what he did is what the Rif did. The Rif, Rav Alfasi. Okay, they both wrote halachot. Unlike them is the Rambam, who wrote a compendium halacha that's written as a codex of halacha, written like a law book without a discussion of the Gemara, with no connection to the Mekorot, and for that the Rambam came under criticism, but nonetheless, because of the brilliance of his work, it was accepted, and there are a lot of perushim to the Rambam. Anyway, that's off subject. But anyway, the Rabbeinu Asher, the Rosh, wrote the following about the sugyot that we saw, okay, just now. Okay, based on the sugya, based on what Rav Papa says in the sugya in Masechet Brachot, right? Okay, what we saw. Hilchach bepesach mevarchin alachat uprusa. In other words, what Rav Ashi says in Rabbeinu, what the Rosh, I'm going to call him the Rosh. Rabbeinu Asher is the Rosh. So it's a contraction of his word name. The first four lines here, up to the underlined words, is what Rabbeinu, what the Rosh is saying is the conclusion that you would think from reading the Gemara. And he disagrees with it. He doesn't think it's right. But it could be understood that way. And he says that that's not right. By the way, what he says here is what the Rambam and the Rif say. They don't paskin like him. Okay? Hilkach, bepesach, on Pesach, we make a blessing on achat uprusa, on a whole, on one, and a prusa, and a broken. In other words, on, you could say 1.5. In other words, one whole, 1.5. Aval bishar yamim tovim, but on other days, other yamim tovim, other yantovs, betzayin and atarte rifta, we break bread on 2 whole loaves, shlemta, in whole ones. Okay, right? That's what the Rif says. That's what the Rosh says. That's what you would think from this Gemara. In other words, when reading Rav Papa and reading what Rav Papa said in Masechet Brachot, which we saw in Masechet Brachot, which is, I think it's also quoted in Masechet Pesachim, but whatever. In other words, the point is that what Rav Papa said, the conclusion from it might be that you only need a whole one and a broken one together. 1.5. You don't need another whole one. Ve'ata lechem oni. In other words, like any yontif, you need 2. We need 2 whole ones, basically, right? Just like on Shabbat, like we saw. But ve'ata lechem oni, comes along the requirement of lechem oni, says the Rosh, ve'gara lachada v'okma al prusa, and it diminishes the one. It diminishes one of those 2 whole ones that we should have on Yontif. So on Leila Seder, we should have 2 whole loaves, but we only have one. We only have 1 whole one because the requirement of Lechem Oni diminishes one of them, makes us break it and establishes it as a prusa. Hilkach, therefore we require lemivtza achada upaga. Therefore the requirement is we require to be botzea, to break bread on 1.5. Right, 1 whole piece and a half piece and a broken piece. V'chi mivatzea, and when he does that, Manach la prusa. He puts the prusa down. He puts the prusa together. Begava de shlemta, together with the whole one. Uvotzea, and then he breaks bread. Damar Rav Papa, because Rav Papa said, Sham over there in Brachot, Hakol modim bepesach shemeniach prusa betoch hashlema. Like Rav Papa said, everybody agrees that on Pesach you put the prusa together with the shlema. Like we said, ubotzea, and then he does bitzia. My kama, what's the reason? Lechemoni ketiv be. So this is what it would seem to be the way to understand the sugya, and indeed the Rambam and the Rif both take it that way. That's all you need is a whole one and the broken one. The lo nira, the Rosh says it doesn't seem right. The mai shana pesach le'inyan lechem mishna mishar kol hayamim tovim, kol yamim tovim. Why should Pesach be different? Why should Leila Seder be different from any one of the other of the yontifs? Shelo yivatzea ela al shtei kikarot, that he shouldn't break. He should only break on 2 whole loaves, 2 kikarot shleimim, like every other yontif. You should do that on Leila Seder also. Why is Pesach any different from any other holiday?
Right.
Okay, somebody has something to say?
Okay. I hope you have a good day.
Okay, please mute because we're hearing you.
Feel bad or fall out or throw up or.
Could you please mute? I'm going to mute you. Wait a minute.
Okay.
I didn't fall out. I threw up.
Is it pretty much a morning thing?
Yeah, when I wake up, I can
Okay.
feel it in my throat. Like there's a little scratchy.
Okay. All right, here we go. Okay, so we said, why should Leila Seder be any different from any other day, any other yontif? We should make a motzi on 2 whole loaves. Deha de darshin and lechem oni lefrusa, because the fact that we have the drush that you require lechem oni, meaning for a prusa, that you need a broken piece to require for the requirement. The fact that we require lechem oni with a prusa, hainu oto lechem shoyotzei bo yedei achilat matzah. That's for the piece of matzah that you're going to eat to fulfill the requirement, to fulfill the mitzvah of eating matzah, which is a separate thing. Aval hamotzi, but the bracha of a motzi, to make a motzi for the bread, pshita, the al shleimim ba'idan, that we need whole loaves. Kishar yamim tovim, like all other yamim tovim. Hilkach, therefore, nahagu ha'am lasot shalosh matzot. Therefore, the people have developed a custom. The custom of the people is to use 3 matzot, and this is what we do, right? I mean, at least most of us who paskin like the Ashkenazi paskin, and by the way, Shulchan Aruch paskins this way also. In the Ikvot HaRosh, we'll get to that in just a moment. Umeotan shalosh matzot yivatzea hashniya, and out of those 3 matzot, you should, here yivatzea doesn't mean to break bread to eat it, but it means to just break it. It means to break. This is Yachatz. Here we're talking about now Yachatz. This is what we came to. We finally got to Yachatz per se. Okay? Of those 3 matzot, he should break the second one into 2. Right? Because that's to create the prusa that we need. He should keep the half of it for the afikoman. And he should leave the other half, the half, between the 2 whole ones. On the first one, the top one, the whole one, he should make the bracha of a motzi. And on the prusa, you should make the bracha of achilat matzah and eat them together. Mikol echat kazayit. You should eat a kazayit from each one of them, from the top one and from the middle one. Umina shlishit, and from the third one, the whole one that's underneath, yaseh kricha kilel. Use that to make sandwich like Hillel, which we do after that, right? After we eat the maror, then we make the sandwich with the matzah and the maror. Tikevan de tikun shalosh mikol chada navid ba mitzvah chada. Since they made a takana, since they made an enactment, they made a rabbinic mitzvah, rabbinic requirement of 3 matzot, then we want to do a mitzvah with every one of them. So we do it. That's what he says. But he says, Va'arotse, goes on to say something else. Va'arotse latzeit yidei chovat shnehem. But if you want to do chovat shnehem, remember that phrase from the Gemara in Brachot? That if you want to fulfill both the requirement of Rabbi Yochanan and Rav Huna, then Yivarech HaMotzi v'al achilat matzah together. You hold the 3 matzot together, and then you say Hamotzi, because that's on the 2 shleimot. You need lechem mishnah. Then you put down the bottom one, right? This is going to be actually later. It's not Yachatz. But then al achilat matzah, then you hold the top 2, right? And you make achilat matzah, and you're mivatzea mina shleima o mina prusa ke'echad. Then you break the top whole one and the prusa together. So that's why we have the middle one. Let's quickly, we only have a few minutes left. The Tur very briefly summarizes what his father wrote. The Tur is the son of the Rosh. Vayikach matzayim tzayid. He should take the middle matzah. Here he's talking about Yachatz. This is the place in the Tur where he talks about Yachatz. He just talked about the dipping of the karpas, and now he gets to Yachatz. He should take the middle matzah and break it into 2. He should give one of them, the half, to one of the people dining with him, one of the people at the table, l'shomra, to keep it for the afikoman. And he should put it under the mapa, under the tablecloth. You wrap it up and then put it under the tablecloth. Why? Zecher, as a remembrance of what the pasuk says, that they went with their food bundled up in their clothing. In other words, wrapped up in the cloth of their clothing, right? In their clothing. V'chetzia sheni yasim bein shtei shleimot. And the other half, the second half, he should put between the 2 whole matzot. In order that he should encounter the whole one first when he's going to make the bracha of Hamotzi. Because from that, he has to be botzea, right? You have to be botzea from the shleima because you made a motzi on it, but you also, of course, have to do it on the middle one, which is the prusa for achilat matzah. And we're going to very quickly, before we close, see what the Beit Yosef says on this. The Beit Yosef is the commentary to the Tur, written by the author of the Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Karo, and he wrote a lengthy commentary to the Tur, which the Shulchan Aruch is really like the cliff notes on it, okay? It's really the case. So anyway, here he writes, he quotes the Kolbo. The Kolbo is a sefer that was written by a Rishon whose the authorship of it is not clear, but it's a very influential book about customs and explaining. And the Kolbo wrote, Haminhag lechalka kodem shikra haggadah. The custom is to do the Yachatz, to break that middle matzah when? Before he reads the Haggadah. That's the Yachatz. It has to be done before you read the Haggadah. Why? Kedei sheyomar alea halach ma'anya ma'ani befusa afkan befusa. So the Kolbo says, the reason why we do Yachatz now, why do we break it now? Why not wait till right before we eat the matzah? Why do we do it all the way before we read the Haggadah? The reason why we do it now, says the Beit Yosef, is because in order that we will be able to say we open the Haggadah with halach ma'anya. We lift up the matzah. We say this is the bread of affliction, and the bread of affliction, the anya, is the ani baprusa, like we saw in the Gemara, is with the prusa. So here you have to have a prusa. So that's one explanation that the Kolbo brings of why we need to do Yachatz now, at this point, before the Haggadah. V'yesh omrim, and there are those who say, Shu kedei sheyiru atan tinokot. Another explanation is, he says, there are those who say, it's in order that the children, tinokot doesn't mean babies, it means children. Children will see it, they'll see that you're right, and v'yishalu, and they'll ask. What will they ask? Mipnei ma anu matminim hamatzah v'adayin lo achalnu. Why are we hiding the matzah and we haven't eaten anything yet? Here we said kiddush. We did some kind of a netilat yadayim, and we ate something which was weird, but okay. But now you broke the matzah. Finally, we took out the matzah. But now we're not eating it. You hid it. And this hiding can mean two things. It can mean either the hiding the afikoman, like we said, you wrap it up, put it under the tablecloth, whatever, or it could be talking about the middle matzah that you hide between the two old ones. Not clear, but whatever it is, it arouses curiosity in the children. And there's a third explanation. So that's more about, that answer is not so much about, it's about that the children will see it being broken and then wonder, why are we hiding it, right? The third explanation he brings in the kolbo, Kidei shelo yiru v'yochlu ota tocha seuda, in order that the children won't see it and eat it during the seuda, not children, I'm sorry, that everybody. Well, if we leave the prusal lying around, this explanation is not about why we break it now, but why we hide it now, why we put it in between the two matzot, or why we hide the afikoman, is in order that people shouldn't see it and eat it during the meal. I mean, during the, in other words, if we leave it lying around and we don't hide we're talking here about the afikoman probably more specifically because we're talking about the Suda. We already ate the middle matzah by then. But people might come to eat it during the Suda, b'shogeg. They'll see a piece of matzah, they'll eat it. V'lo yeh lo od matzah meshumeret. Then he won't have a piece left behind, set aside, ba'achona, at the end, to be the afikoman. Therefore, we hide it ad kan l'shono. That's the Beit Yosef. Okay. I basically sort of have to call an end to this. I'm going to skip that slide, and I'm just going to tell you the Magen Avraham here in this slide. The Magen Avraham is one of the Nosei Kelim, the Shulchan Aruch. He makes a comment here that he says that there are some people who put the matzah, the broken piece, which is going to be the afikoman, on their shoulder as a zecher l'yitziat mitzrayim, because of what they did. They took the thing. We said it was slung in their clothing. They wrapped it up in their clothing and they left Mitzrayim that way. So it was a remembrance of that. And there are all kinds of minhagim. Children go outside, they come back in. So Sfardim do that. And they ask him, who are you? I'm a Jew. You come from, right? That whole thing. That's all part of what they do at the beginning of the Magid, which comes right after the Yachatz, right? Okay. Anyway, one more thing I just want to mention. I'm just going to say it outside. We're not going to read it inside. There are many additional levels of meaning that have been given to this Yachatz. Some of them are written in the Haggadot. So you have to find the right Haggadah to find them. But some of them are Kabbalistic, or from the Zohar, from the Kabbalah, different what the three matzot represent. I'm not going to get into it. But there's one explanation that I wanted to bring from Rav Kook. And I'm not going to read it inside, but just to say it outside. Rav Kook says basically, and I'm going to post these slides on the Shiur page, so if you want to read it inside, you can to see it. This, by the way, is not Rav Kook. This is a summary of Rav Kook. Rav Kook's Hebrew is quite difficult, flowery, beautiful, poetic Hebrew, beautiful Hebrew, but sometimes difficult to understand. If you have a translation, that's great. It's from his work called Olat Riyah, which is his commentaries on the Sidur and on the davening. Anyway, Rav Kook gives an explanation of why we break the matzah. Again, I'm saying this is an overlaid meaning on everything we said already, right? He says that there's two types of eating, and it's represented by the two halves, the two broken pieces of matzah. One type of eating is eating that we do because it's just for the enjoyment of eating, not because we need the nourishment, not because we're hungry, not because we're starving like we are at the beginning of the meal in Leila Seder after all that time we were reading Haggadah, but It's what we at the end of the meal. That's the afikoman, and that represents a kind of a higher level where the eating is enjoyed as a spiritual activity of sorts, whereas the other half, the half that we eat at the beginning of the meal, we eat when we're very hungry. So that's has to do more with nourishment and satisfying our hunger. And the point that Rav Kook makes, if I can summarize it, and it's a little lengthier, so he can't get into it now, I'm just going to finish with this, is that the two things are really, in a way, inseparable. They both come from the same thing. Yes, we break them apart to show that we have these two levels, but we can't escape the two levels. You know, like after we make Kiddush, says Rav Kook, we feel like we're on a very high level. We're alinu b'kedusha. We're up in the stratosphere. We're very high up. We've risen up to a higher level of kedusha, but we can't stay there. When we get to the level of the meal and everything, we have to be with the prusa, the ani. We're hungry. We have to eat. So we eat that's the prusa that's between the two matzot. We get to that lower level of eating. But at the end of the meal, we go back to the higher level, which is eaten when we're sated already, when we're satiated, like the Korban Pesach. And the Afikoman, of course, as we say, is a zecher to the eating of the matzah that we ate with the Korban Pesach at the end of the meal when we're sated, because the Korban Pesach you don't eat when you're hungry, you eat it after, at the end of the meal. And that's on a higher level, says Rav Kook. Anyway, there are many explanations of this Yachatz, and that wasn't the focus of my shiur, but some other time we'll look at those as well. But anyway, I wish you all a very happy, kosher Pesach, meaningful Pesach, and we should have a Pesach where we're at the tables of their families, the hostages will be returned, they'll be back, and that Am Yisrael will not be fighting a war anymore, and that we'll achieve some kind of ending that's better than what we've had up until now. Bezrat Hashem, Hashem should lead us to a geula shlema, and to vanquish our enemies. Chol dor vador omdim aleinu lachalotenu v'kadosh baruch hu matzilenu miyadam. Pesach kasher v'sameach.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Rabbi.
Thank you so much for your excellent share. It was really, really well done.
Thank you. Okay, see you in the future when we come back after the break. We have a long break.